Right now, in mythology, there's a being holding up the entire sky. Not as a metaphor, not as a punishment with an end date, but forever. No trial, no appeal. Just an eternity of standing in one place, arms raised, while the heavens rest on his shoulders. His name is Atlas, and his story isn't really about strength. It's about what happens when you back the wrong side of a war. Atlas was a titan, a member of the generation of gods that ruled the universe before the Olympians ever existed. His parents were Iapetus, one of the original 12 titans, and the Oceanid Clymene, a sea nymph, making Atlas part of a powerful lineage. His brothers were Prometheus, who would later steal fire for mankind, Epimetheus and Menoetius. Atlas himself was associated above all with strength and endurance. In some accounts, he was even said to possess great astronomical and navigational knowledge, credited by later Greek writers as the first being to understand the movements of the stars. For a time, the Titans ruled everything. Cronus, Atlas's uncle, sat on the throne of the cosmos, having overthrown his own father, the primordial sky god Uranus. It looked like the Titan's reign would last forever. It didn't. Cronus had a problem, a prophecy that one of his own children would overthrow him, the same way he'd overthrown his father. His solution was to swallow each of his children the moment they were born. His wife Rhea, tired of watching her children disappear, eventually hid her youngest son and tricked Cronus into swallowing a rock instead. That son was Zeus. Zeus grew up in secret, eventually returned, freed his siblings from inside Cronus, and declared war on the Titans. This war, the Titanomachy, lasted 10 years and shook the foundations of the known universe. And when it came time to choose sides, Atlas didn't stay neutral. He became the leader of the Titan army, fighting directly against Zeus and the Olympians. It was the wrong call. The Olympians won. And unlike most of the defeated Titans, who were simply imprisoned in Tartarus, the deepest pit beneath the underworld, Zeus had something more specific in mind for Atlas, the general who had led the opposing army. Zeus didn't send Atlas to Tartarus, he gave him a job. Atlas was condemned to stand at the western edge of the world and hold up the heavens, in most tellings, quite literally the sky itself, on his shoulders for eternity, not as a temporary sentence. Forever later poets and playwrights leaned into just how brutal this was. The Greek poet Hesiod, writing around the 8th century BCE in his Theogony, places Atlas at the borders of the earth, in front of the clear-voiced Hesperides, holding up the wide heaven with his head and hands, unwearying, a punishment with no possibility of rest, no shift change, no end date. Where exactly was this location? Ancient geographers placed it at the far western edge of the known world, modern-day Morocco, at the mountain range that still carries his name today, the Atlas Mountains. Atlas's story doesn't end with just standing there. He resurfaces centuries later in one of the most famous hero narratives in Greek mythology, the 12 Labors of Heracles. Heracles' 11th labor was to retrieve the golden apples of the Hesperides. Apples grown in a garden at the western edge of the world, guarded by nymphs called the Hesperides and a 100-headed dragon named Ladon. Conveniently, the Hesperides were said to be Atlas's own daughters, and their garden lay near where Atlas stood holding the sky. Heracles came up with a plan. Rather than fighting his way in, he offered to take the sky's weight himself, temporarily, if Atlas would go retrieve the apples for him, since the garden and Atlas's own daughters would let their father approach without a fight. Atlas agreed. For the first time in the myth's history, someone else held the sky, and Atlas walked free. And then, in the most human moment of the entire myth, Atlas considered simply not coming back. Free of his burden for the first time in an eternity, he told Heracles he'd deliver the apples to King Eurystheus himself, leaving Heracles to hold the heavens permanently in his place. Heracles, no fool, pretended to agree, but asked Atlas to hold the sky again for just a moment so he could adjust a cushion on his shoulders for comfort. Atlas, momentarily fooled, took the sky back. Heracles picked up the apples and walked away, leaving Atlas exactly where Zeus had put him. There's a second, stranger version of how Atlas's story might have ended, one tied to an entirely different hero. In later retellings, particularly through the Roman poet Ovid's Metamorphoses, Perseus, fresh from beheading the Gorgon Medusa, arrives at Atlas's kingdom seeking rest. Atlas, fearing a prophecy that a son of Zeus would one day steal his golden apples, refuses him hospitality and tries to drive him away by force. Perseus, unable to defeat a Titan in combat, does something else instead. He turns away and holds up the severed head of Medusa, whose gaze turns any living thing to stone. Atlas, according to Ovid, is transformed instantly. His beard and hair become forests. His shoulders and hands become ridges and cliffs. His head becomes a Mount Peak lost in the clouds. He becomes, quite literally, the Atlas Mountains, still holding up the sky, but now a solid rock rather than flesh. It's worth noting, these two endings don't fully agree with each other, and ancient sources weren't always consistent about Atlas's fate. Some traditions have him eternally standing and suffering. Others have him petrified into a mountain range, and in a strange way, finally at peace. Stone doesn't grow tired. Here's a detail that gets lost in modern retellings, and even in a lot of ancient art. Atlas was never depicted holding up the earth. That's a much later addition. In the original myths, Atlas holds up Auranos, the sky, the heavens, the celestial vault. The image of Atlas straining under the weight of a globe representing planet Earth doesn't emerge until the Renaissance, when cartographers began putting his image on the covers of map collections, which is exactly where the modern word atlas, meaning a book of maps, comes from. The Titan sentence to hold up the heavens became, centuries later, the mascot for holding up the world of geography instead. Atlas's legacy didn't stop at mountains and maps. The Atlantic Ocean takes its name directly from him, originally referred to by Greek geographers as the Sea of Atlas, since it lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, near the western edge of the world where Atlas himself was said to stand. And centuries later, Plato would invoke a descendant of Atlas, a king named Atlas, said to rule a legendary island civilization. As the namesake of Atlantis itself, whether Plato meant it as history, allegory, or pure invention, remains one of the oldest unresolved debates in classical scholarship. Atlas never got a redemption arc. He never overthrew his sentence, never got pardoned, never returned to power. In most versions of his myth, he's exactly where Zeus put him at the end of the war, still standing, still holding, whether as flesh or a stone. And maybe that's what makes his story different from almost every other figure in Greek mythology. Heroes get transformed by trials. Atlas simply endures his, unchanged, for as long as the myth has existed to tell it. Somewhere at the edge of the ancient world, a Titan is still holding up the sky. Not because he won anything, but because he lost. And someone had to. If you want the next myth hiding behind the name of an ocean, a mountain range, or a book on your shelf, subscribe. Riddles of Mythology uncovers what everyone else leaves out.